All right, good morning. I think we're on.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee. Mikey, would you please call the roll?
The vice chair of this committee is Mr. Beard. Is Mr. Beard here yet? No. Ann Duncan, are you on the phone?
Ann's online.
Ann's on the line.
I could barely hear her, though, so if we can...
Mr. Franklin?
Present.
I thought I had a better voice than that. I'm going to drop my voice.
All over again.
Okay. Ms. Duncan? I think we can hear you, but we'll work on that. Mr. Franklin?
Present.
Mr. Hosseini? I expect Mr. Hosseini eventually on the line. Dr. Marshall?
Here.
Mr. Rood?
Present.
Mr. Tripp?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mikey. Well, welcome to what's going to be an interesting day, I am sure. And frankly, an important day for the system as we take our first pass at looking at fee increases that the legislature has authorized us to review on behalf of the various universities. Before we get into that conversation, I want to be clear, we'd originally planned to go until about 2 o'clock today. Maybe that will work, maybe it won't. It seems as though we have a number of items. There may be a great deal of discussion on some of these items, and I'm okay with that. We're in the process of doing something that hasn't been done. The decisions we make today are going to lay the predicate for certainly all future fee discussions and all future fee requests as we move forward. So I think we need to be as deliberate as we need to be today. Although it's not on the agenda this morning, I think it's important at least to give a very general comment on the budget that the governor released earlier this week, or I guess late last week, one or the other. There's a lot of discussion. There's a ton of media. The whirlwinds of Tallahassee are floating around the budget. I just want to give you a thought from my perspective on a couple of things. Number one, I was thrilled that the governor maintained our baseline funding. I think it shows a commitment to higher ed, and I think it shows a respect of the university system. I know there's some issues about the tuition increase, inclusion or not inclusion in the budget. This is going to be a process and a conversation, and I know some of us are disappointed about the New Florida Initiative, but let me be clear of what I think is going on. And I think the governor has put a stake in the ground that says if you seek funding in these difficult times, you will have to justify it and earn it. And I think what he is going to be requiring of all of the agencies and organizations, because certainly we're not unique to this, is that we do just that. And I've got to be honest with you, as we go into the legislative session, as we have these conversations with the governor, with the legislature, I am confident that our university system and each of our 11 universities will more than stand the test of justifying and earning further investment by the taxpayers. Introspection makes us better. And I'm confident that this chance to be introspective and to talk about what we're doing and to tell our story and the importance of the system, particularly in restarting the economy of the state of Florida, will indeed make us better and provide us with a forum to communicate what we're doing. So I wanted to just put that out there as an overview. I know there's a lot of whirlwind out there, but I'm optimistic as we move into the legislative session. I think we've got a great partnership with the legislature, and I think we're going to be stronger as a result of what we're going through at this point in time. That said, let me ask Tim Jones to step up before we get into the fees and those conversations and just give us a report on the Student Life Facilities Survey. I think this is going to have some particular relevance to our conversation today on at least one, if not several, of our fees, and it's important data that we need to hear. So Tim, will you just walk us through the Student Life Facilities Survey report, and then if anyone has any questions, that'll be great. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your folder, there's a tab called Student Life Facilities Survey Report, and that's the report I'll be referring to this morning. Legislative proviso from 2010 asked us to go out and survey all the universities to determine what types of student life facilities are needed on each of our campuses. So in your packet, there's a report by institution that identifies those facilities. The total cost of all of those is about $2 billion. Now, a lot of those are housing facilities or parking facilities, which could be funded from the revenues from those enterprises. That totals about $1.4 billion. So that leaves about $600 million in other student life facilities such as, wellness centers or rec centers and so forth. And those facilities are normally funded from the Capital Improvement Trust Fund or the building fee. And as the committee knows, that fee has been capped for 25 years at about $4.76. We have had this issue on our legislative agenda in the past to try to get that cap increased. That is a fee that is set in statute by the legislature. It is not one of those fees that they gave us the authority to increase. So generally the students are supportive of this, and maybe Governor Franklin could speak to that in a little bit. But what the proposal in the report is that we increase the fee no more than $1 per year per credit hour, and the fee could not exceed a total of 10% of tuition. So there would be some limit, so you couldn't go up to the 10% of tuition all at once. It would only be $1 per credit year, and it would start at the local board of trustees level. So if they felt like they had a need on their campus to increase the CITF fee, they would make that decision there with input from the students. Then it would come to this board for final consideration. Now, all of that would require legislative approval, so what we're asking the committee to consider today is whether or not you want to include that recommendation as part of the legislative agenda for this current legislative session. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Tim? I don't see any, Tim. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on the concept that we talked about, that Tim just talked about, which is including, at least recommending to the board that we include a recommendation into our legislative agenda for a increase in the CITF fees to come through the next legislative cycle? What would happen would be, if we chose to make that recommendation, we would take it up possibly at the board meeting next week, include it in our legislative agenda. If the legislature were to approve that fee increase capacity, then each university board of trustees would have to meet and decide whether or not they wanted to increase that fee, and then bring it back, and then we would approve it or not approve it under the process. So any discussion? Gallup?
Yeah, there's certainly a need for student life facilities within the state university system. There's even some fees that we're looking at within our agenda packet that also is going to be meeting the needs that CITF would normally meet. And looking at when CITF was instituted, I believe back in the early 1980s, in reference to inflation, I believe the equivalent might be about $8.75 or what have you. And so there's a lot of older institutions or institutions that might not be growing significantly or exponentially over the years that's having an issue in reference to building that CITF fund and to build a new student union or student life facilities. And so in my opinion, I believe that it's actually a great need for it. Now, of course, there's institutions that might be growing exponentially as we speak now that because of their growth is able to accumulate quite a bit of funding in the CITF fund. But most of the institutions that kind of have capped their enrollment and aren't growing as much have a need for the CITF fund just naturally. So you can even look at an example. USF, I think, had the Marshall Center fee. University of North Florida had to have a new student union fee. And as of right now, I believe we're looking at a fee at the University of West Florida in reference to renovating their student union as well. And so in my opinion, there is a need for it. And I like the way that the procedure is set up in reference to the University Board of Trustees taking up first, and it coming back to our board as well to make the final decision on whether or not we implement the increase, with only $1 being the maximum up to a certain amount, which I'm comfortable with.
And the recommendation would be a $1 maximum up to then the 10% number. Other questions or comments? Is there a sense of the committee that this is something we would want to recommend to the full board for inclusion in the legislative package this year? Or is it a wait a year scenario? And this may well impact some of the universities that are asking for fees in this cycle. But is there a sense of the committee? So, Governor Beard, you would think we would recommend to the full board the inclusion of this into our legislative priorities package?
Absolutely. I mean, in these times of economic hardships, I think this is the kind of, it's already a fee that we have in place. It's the students have a big say on it, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay. Is that a motion, Governor Beard?
Yeah, I'll make that a motion.
Governor Beard, it's moved that we incorporate an increase of the CITF fee into our legislative package as a priority for this legislative session, at least recommended to the board for adoption. Is there a second?
Second.
And there's a second, Governor Rood. Any other discussion? Chancellor, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, sir. If you will, I have been the recipient of CITF projects as a university president, and I'm probably, it's always dangerous to say speaking for the presidents here today, but I find it hard to believe that the presidents individually and collectively would not be supportive. Some of the premier projects from a student life standpoint that have been constructed on university campuses over the year, as Governor Franklin mentioned, have been CITF driven. And the beauty of the CITF projects are typically, they are student life oriented, that is the nature of the project, but also they are typically well supported by the student body themselves as the people who finance them, but also the people who recognize that by financing them, they are financing something that is good for student life. What is really most unique about CITF projects is that oftentimes the majority of the students who support them do not end up being the recipients of what they bring to a university because of the long-term nature of the construction. But these are students who understand clearly that what they will leave behind at the university is something they wish they had had access to while they were there, as an injection into student life. It is controlled, and I hate to sound process-oriented, but as a system, and Mr. Chairman, you mentioned this, the CITF project is controlled. It does have checks and balances built within it. It is not simply a matter of wanting to do something. We put people through a rather rigorous process of assuring that indeed it is being done by the numbers. But at the end of the day, the CITF projects really have, I think, helped us do what we would not be able in many cases to do otherwise, to inject into the student life portion of what we provide a very special opportunity. So I applaud your recommendation to the full board.
Other comments or thoughts? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of including a CITF increase under the parameters that we've discussed into our legislative agenda package and making that recommendation to the full board, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Terrific. Thank you, Tim. I want to move forward now into our discussion of fees and market rate tuition. We've got a little precatory slideshow just to try to set the tone for the conversation. What we're facing today, what we're looking at today is 6 universities requesting one new fee, 1 university requesting 2 new fees, 1 requesting an increase to an existing fee that has a statutory cap, I think that's the orientation fee, and 4 universities requesting market rate tuition for 18 different programs. In your packets as well, your packages are divided by university. There are also tuition fee and housing projections. If you recall, we asked the universities to put forth projections of where they thought they would be. They are non-binding projections, but it's thinking into the future, letting us try to gauge what students may expect. And as all of you could expect, all universities are proposing a 15% tuition differential increase for fall of 2011 if none comes from the legislature. They are all also proposing increases to existing fees, in addition to the fee increases, or the new fees we're talking about today. The current proposed tuition differential fee and tuition differential increase and fee increase would add from $483 to $631 for 30 credit hours to a student. That's basically a year. And the new fees we are considering today in an average student would add anywhere from $30 to $143 to the student's year for additional credit hours. If you take a look at this chart, you'll see we've got a breakout of the portion of student fees and tuition that are paid. Obviously, the blue line is tuition paid by student. The red lines are fees. This is based on 30 credit hours. And as you can see, at this point in 2010, 2011, we've got 32% of the students' purchase, 32% of the students' spend, if you will, is on fees. And if anyone has any questions along the way, by the way, please stop me. I'll be happy to defer them to Tim. I'm honest about that. These are the current fees that exist right now. And they are capped. Their ability to be increased. The increase is limited to 5% or equivalent of the base tuition, whichever is higher. We currently charge athletic fees, health fees, activity and service fees, technology fees, financial aid fees. 10 universities have a transportation access fee, and 2 universities have unique fees. As Governor Franklin said earlier, we've got a USF Marshall fee and an FSU Student Affairs Facility Use fee. Frankly, sometimes I get concerned that our tuition bills start looking like our phone bills with all of the various line items and different fees. As we take a look now at what we are going to do today, if you recall last year, the legislature had authorized the Board of Governors to review, it authorized boards of trustees to create new fees on their campuses up to 10% of tuition. Fee proposals, we sat down and did a rulemaking last summer, and according to the legislature and our rulemaking, fee proposals which we've received have to include the purpose of the new fee, demonstrable student-based need that is not being met through another service or fee, process used to assure student input in the creation of the fee and the maintenance of the fee, financial impact on student, accountability measures, that is metrics, what are we going to do, what are going to outcome, proposed restrictions or limitations placed on the fee in estimated revenue, and proposed expenditures in that process. Fees have to be implemented in the fall term, so we're talking about them now. They'll roll out into fall. It won't be summer or spring. A fee committee, once this is approved, has to be created. Revenue cannot be transferred to an auxiliary enterprise or a DSO and cannot be used to secure debt. That is the key. Our fees, these new fees, are not bondable. Every 5 years, the Board of Trustees has got to review that new fee, and any decrease or continuation of a fee at that 5-year period or throughout the process is delegated to the Board of Trustees, but any increase in a fee has got to come back to the Board of Governors for approval. Today what we're going to do is hear each university's proposal. Our committee will talk about those proposals, and just so you know, I was asked by several people if we were going to hear them all and then vote on them, or hear and vote and hear and vote. It is my intention to hear one, vote on it, hear one, vote on it, at least university by university, so that, others can sort of get the benefit of the dialogue, if nothing else. I think it's going to be an important dialogue. We will vote today. Our decision is not final. We will be making recommendations to the board. The board will take up our recommended approval or rejection of the fee on our conference call on February 17th. If the board denies the recommendation for a new fee, the Board of Trustees at the university can, within 5 days, request a reconsideration of that fee to our appeals committee, and that appeals committee will meet within 10 days of that request. I want to just give an overlay as to where we are situationally, and then some of my thoughts before we move into these fees. We had a tuition and fees workshop, financial aid workshop, about a month ago. And we know our students are facing challenges. We got high unemployment, we've got slow economic recovery, we've got consumer prices going up, we've got a state deficit that ranges somewhere from $3.5 to $5 billion. State university system has lost 24% of base support. And for the last 2 years, we've had a 15% tuition and tuition differential mix increase. For the last 2 years, there has been 15% per year increase, as well as increases in base fees. They continue to arise. So with that backdrop, and as we move into this fee conversation, I just want to be clear, at least my filters as we move through the process. We're going to ask each university to come up with their presenter, and I have asked that a student be present or weigh in, either here or on the phone. Hopefully we've been able to do that. I think it's important that we remember a couple of things as we go into this conversation today. Number one, this is the first time we've done this. The legislature has given the Board of Governors authority to do this, and we have to do this in a very responsible and meaningful way, pretty much like we do everything else. That said, we also need to understand that whatever fees, whatever types of fees, whatever character of fees we approve today, we'll be hard-pressed to reject next time. So we are laying precedent right now as to what our filters are, what our screens are, and what fees we are willing to approve, and where we as a, at least budget committee, feel it is appropriate to fee students at their universities. I'll give you my personal filters, just so you'll know what I'm thinking and looking at. We've spent a lot of time in this process. Last summer writing the rules and then meeting with folks. As I'm listening to presentations today, and I know everyone has their own filters, but my filters will be the following. Number one, I want to make sure that any fee that's proposed to be imposed on students has been talked about with students and vetted through some form of a student process. Number two, I will be concerned for any fee that every student pays and few students benefit from. To me, it is anathema to fee all students so that a small select group can do something or participate in something. That is my filter. It doesn't have to be your filter. I'm concerned about a new fee that should really be funded through another budget line, an E&G line, a CITF line. I don't think the intention of the legislature or this body is to just create another way to raise A&S fees, CITF fees, or E&G fees. I think the idea behind these fees is to do something different and or better, not more of the same. That's why those fees are capped. I'm concerned about any new fee that is, again, a continuation of an existing fee that can't be increased. I don't want to play hide the ball. I'm troubled that we be very cautious to make certain that whatever we do cannot be perceived by someone else as gaming the existing system, finding a way around a rule or around a regulation that exists for a reason by using these new fees. I don't think we can afford that as a board. I don't think we can afford that as a system. So I'll be asking some direct questions today, and I trust the rest of you will too, to make certain that these fees are not perceived as gaming the current system. And finally, I know there's some student support behind a lot of these fees, or at least a few of these fees. I've heard from some student groups that I'm thrilled with the activism as an old student body president. It excites me to see students excited about something. That said, I am equally hopeful that we'll have that same student support when the differential tuition conversation comes around a little bit later in the year. I understand how the process works, and I'll be interested to see how the support today of these kinds of fees translate over into a differential tuition conversation a little bit later in the year. With that, I'm happy to open for kind of a general parameters, filters discussion, or if not, we'll get right into it.
I have a quick question. Is there any caps on what the total amount of fees can be vis-a-vis tuition? I see in certain types of fees they're limited to 10% of tuition, but is there any total cap on this?
There is. Tim, what's a total cap? These fees are capped at 10%, what we're talking about here. But as far as the total cap, is there, Tim, or is it just incrementally as we go up? Yeah. So it doesn't sound like there's a total cap, Governor Colson. It's just this one can be 5, this one can be 5, these can be up to 10.
Up to
10% of base tuition. No, these new fees that we're talking about that we can approve can be up to 10% of base tuition.
each fee.
Well, no, each university in new fees can be up to 10, not each fee at the
All new
university.
fees.
Correct.
Right.
Tim?
The total of the new fees
New fees.
Some of the existing fees that you saw earlier are capped at 5%, and they're individual fees. And there's no limit on fees that are currently capped in statute, like the orientation fee. There's no limit on what you could raise that fee to.
Governor Colson, I believe, memory serves me, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, currently the breakout is at about 40, a student's spend right now is about 40% fees, 60% tuition. Is that about right, Tim?
No, I think you're thinking about what the student contributes toward.
That's right.
Their education is about 40, 60.
You're right, 40,
I
60.
think the slide I saw, it looked like it was 32% is in fees right now.
You're correct. You're correct. That was a slide. If I
And
could-
there's no cap on that, so that could go to 50% or...
Well, you're ultimately capped, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you're ultimately capped by the national average. Tuition and fees cannot exceed the national average.
We got a lot of room there, Governor Colson. My slides aren't moving backwards, you guys. Notwithstanding, I think you're right, Governor. I think it was a 32% number. Other questions or thoughts before we begin?
Let me just mention one thing. We had a meeting yesterday with some of the legislatures, and a few comments came about where they indicated that they were expecting us to move tuition, and I would assume including fees, to the national average. And that's kind of why the 15% went in play. And I don't know if that's all of the legislature, probably not, but that expectation is part of theirs. So.
Well, it would take us a long time at 15% a year to get to the national average.
That's right. So.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments?